WAVE's future is aligned with low-footprint circular supply chains for the resources of the future. For over 21 years, we've been determining strategies, designing and engineering solutions and delivering built assets for our clients. From a natural resource in the ground or a secondary byproduct to the advanced materials required to electrify our future, WAVE's expertise is being engaged globally. WAVE International, delivering commercially engineered projects for 21 years.
Hello, I'm Jessica Robinson, Head of the Australian Critical Minerals Facilitation Office in the Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources. And I'm really happy to be speaking to you today about the approach Australia is taking to address the challenges of the critical minerals sector and how we're on track to become a world leader in exploration, extraction, production and processing of critical minerals. Next slide. In a nutshell, critical minerals have become more and more important due to technological change. Critical minerals underpin many of the important technologies that are foundational for everyday life and for defence, aerospace and high-tech industries. These minerals are considered essential for the economic and industrial development of many economies, and they are unfortunately subject to risk in terms of their vulnerable to disruption. So what puts the supply chains at risk? Well, they're highly concentrated, thin, and have opaque markets. They are often subject to disruption due to demand potentially outstripping supply, and there's a long time frame involved in bringing online new supply. At the top of the slide here, you'll see an example of one supply chain in particular, which is the supply chain for producing magnets. And the red components in the middle demonstrate a really highly concentrated part of that supply chain, with separation, the metal development, alloy production and magnets being the most concentrated. The expected demand in key inputs into things like magnets and batteries are expected to really exacerbate supply chain vulnerabilities over the coming years, with a huge increase in the need for critical minerals such as lithium to underpin the expected huge increase in electric vehicle uptake. Next slide, please. So Australia has significant resources and is world ranking in terms of production of lithium and rare earths. Many of the supply chains that go into batteries and magnets, Australia is fortunately well endowed with the natural resources. The benefit for Australia in terms of developing these resources is the huge economic value that comes from moving further up the value chain. This is important, obviously, as well as just demonstrated on the previous slide, to address where the key choke points are in global supply chains. But it's really important for Australia, if we're to play a role in diversifying global supply chains, that we do move further up the value chain and look to not just extracting and exploring, but to processing and separating our critical minerals deposits, and then potentially moving into manufacturing capabilities with the development of battery, magnet and alloy precursors, and potentially into metal production. Next slide, please. So what's the government doing about critical minerals, and how are we going to extract the most out of the opportunity that exists and also play a role in diversifying global supply chains? Well, the government's been looking at this challenge for a while now. In 2019, the government released the first version of the Critical Minerals Strategy and the first version of the Critical Minerals Prospectus. In November 2019, after a review of the actions that we were taking, the government decided to step up efforts again in recognition of the need for action to diversify supply chains. This resulted in a number of announcements of new measures, including the establishment of my office, as well as extra funding into R&D and investment promotion activity. In January 2020, my office opened, and in April 2020, we established a national work plan with state and territory governments. And the importance of that is to try and drive a whole of government, whole of nation approach to developing Australia's critical minerals potential. In October 2020, Minister Pitt and Minister Birmingham released the latest version of the Australian Critical Minerals Prospectus, which is a much more comprehensive coverage of Australia's critical minerals capability, extending it beyond just rare earths to the range of critical minerals potential in Australia. The prospectus covers around 40 projects, with then a full coverage of 200 projects across the greenfield critical minerals part of our project list. Next slide, please. My office has a significant comprehensive strategy to not only develop Australia's supply potential, but also to work on creating demand and pull through for Australian supply. And also a third pillar being working with like-minded countries to improve the operation of global markets. So on the supply side, we are, as I said, investing more in research and development with 4.2 million going into the capabilities of CSIRO, ANSTO and Geoscience Australia to not only develop our full resource potential, including looking at the capability of extracting minerals from tailings and mining waste, but also looking at how we can develop more efficient and environmentally friendly processing capabilities and work that ANSTO is doing around solvent extraction and the ability to create a modular system to plug into projects to really fast track some of that science work. Another key flagship program that we are progressing with CSIRO is the development of an energy metals roadmap. And this is going to really provide a significant blueprint to demonstrate where Australia has competitive advantage in moving further up the value chain and the type of support that's required to realise that opportunity. My office is also working really closely with industry and in particular supporting Australian projects to identify new sources of investment and offtake, with particular focus on how we can bring government financing mechanisms to the table. So we're working closely with Export Finance Australia, who's been given a clear mandate to help support critical minerals projects. Other financing mechanisms such as NAIF and the Clean Energy Finance Corporation have also got an important role to play in terms of helping crowd in private sector investment. Geoscience Australia has also been topped up with significant funds to help expand their existing exploration program, which is really going to be important in terms of untapping our full resource potential. We're working on the demand side with many like-minded countries. We're engaging not only just on the attracting investment and offtake side, but also looking to establish a key end-to-end supply chain program with key countries to help de-risk investment and promote our projects. On the national roadmap piece, two key focus areas which we think are going to be really important for both helping with the supply side and creating demand. The first is working with states and territories to establish critical minerals processing hubs and precincts. This is going to provide a really important source of support, particularly around attracting in both federal, state and territory and local government support around infrastructure needs. So making sure, for instance, that projects have access to the relevant inputs to help develop that downstream processing, which really comes down to sources of energy, chemical reagents, water, and obviously good transport, particularly for minerals that are destined for an export market. This is also looking at novel ways of supporting projects, including through looking at how we can bring various feedstocks into shared processing facilities. On the demand side with states and territories, we are working on an ethical certification scheme, which will also include a mineral provenance pilot and a blockchain pilot. And that's going to be really important to help projects demonstrate that they meet high global standards for production, exploration and processing. We know that Australian companies do meet those high standards. This provides a really important mechanism, though, help demonstrate that those standards are being met, and obviously provides a clear technology solution to demonstrate where the resources are coming from and at each point of the processing point. On the third strand down the bottom, in terms of improving the operation of global markets, this is really important because we can continue to increase supply, and we can work on the demand side to get the pull through for Australian supply. But ultimately, we have to work with a range of other countries to also ensure that our global markets are supporting new players and create a level playing field. And so some of the mechanisms that we're working to achieve that are on participating in global standard setting. So through the international standard setting piece, we are working with a range of countries to make sure that sustainable safety measures and other governance mechanisms are in place to govern this sector. We're also working with the US and a range of other countries on a new initiative called the Energy Resource Governance Initiative, which provides an important mechanism and toolkits to help developing and developed countries make sure that in exploring their resources and developing them, that they are meeting high sustainability and governance requirements. Next slide, please. This slide provides a real snapshot of some of that international engagement and where we're focusing our efforts across the globe to make sure that Australian projects have good market access, but as I've explained, also to ensure that the access is backed up by government to government support. And again, this is really important given the concentrated nature of supply chains, which means that attracting in new sources of finance and offtake can be really difficult and particularly challenging for projects taking on that burden alone. Some of the key countries that we're working with, the US, we have a joint action plan with the US that we're progressing. We've met 2 times this year already. We've recently, in the middle of the year, landed a memorandum of understanding with India, and that's going to provide a really important structure to support Australian energy companies working together. We're also working quite closely with the EU, UK, which provide obviously significant market opportunities with the expected demand for electric vehicles. And of course, Republic of Korea and Japan remain very important resource partners for Australia, and with Japan already a very close cooperation on critical minerals with Linus, our rare earth flagship company, being a key underpinning for that. Next slide, please. We've outlined here some of the other significant support that the government's putting into developing critical minerals. On the top hand side, Future Batteries Industry is a $25 million government-supported program with co-matching from industry and academia. This is a really important piece of work that is looking at the full supply chain for a battery industry in Australia, and is already highlighting the really strong competitive advantages that Australia has in particularly developing chemical precursors. There are a range of other cooperative research projects that again are focused on bringing together both government, industry participants and research organisations, with 20 million already going in the 2019-22 year for critical minerals projects. Recently, through the federal budget announcements, Minister Andrews and the Prime Minister announced a significant modern manufacturing strategy, with a key plank of that being 1.3 billion in a modern manufacturing initiative, which will be rolled out over the next 4 years. Importantly, critical minerals processing and resource technology has been identified as one of 6 key priority areas under that initiative. Other key areas to note, particularly for foreign investors, is the very generous R&D tax incentive program that the Australian government has, which is open to foreign companies that are pursuing R&D activities undertaken in Australia. The other thing I'd like to flag here is a significant investment going into recycling and circular economy, with the Australian government committing 20 million for a new product stewardship investment fund, which is focused on accelerating work on industry-led recycling schemes. Recently, through the budget as well, there's been a top-up of ARENA, which is the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, with a funding of an extra $15 million to support research and development to address end-of-life issues for solar PV panels. All of these initiatives are really important to lock in behind that support that that exists in those in the foreign in the Australian government financing vehicles, with now a mixture of grant programs as well as debt and equity support through those financing mechanisms. Next slide, please. So I've listed my contact details here and the contact details to my office. We have a newsletter that we issue quite regularly, hopefully every month, which we really encourage people to sign up to. As you can see, Australia is taking a very comprehensive approach to not only how we develop our own supply potential and bring online a range of critical minerals projects across the various important supply chains, but also the work we're doing with foreign counterparts to make sure we've got robust, diverse and stable supply chains, as well as make sure that the demand measures are being implemented to help diversify the sources of finance and offtake coming into these projects. Through the COVID environment, it's exacerbated, I guess, the supply chain fragility. But for Australia, our projects continue to keep advancing, with many of them continuing exploration, feasibility studies and securing native title agreements in this time frame. We're expecting to see production ramp up, and we're already seeing production having already recovered or back to pre-COVID levels already. Thank you very much for your time, and look forward to people getting in touch with us. Thank you.